Hi there, class of 86. Courage never quits. What follows is an interview with Dave Urban, and we had some technical difficulties with Dave's mic. I want to apologize ahead of time. When you have someone like David J. Urban come on a podcast, it's like lightning striking. Once you have it, you don't want to try to redo it. It's perfect as it stands. It is going to take a little of your patience to be able to hear and listen to the wit and wisdom of David J. Urban. I apologize for the technical difficulties, but I hope you enjoy it anyway. Don't let your courage quit and not listen to it. Please enjoy Dave Urban. David J. Urban, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paul. Appreciate you doing it. Appreciate being here.
Thanks for taking the time. Where in the world are you now? What's going on behind the scenes with Dave Urban?
There's no behind the scenes. I have no private life. My private life is public life. I'm sitting in my house, in my home office in Florida today, trying to dig out from the pile of work sitting on my desk, which I have discreetly pushed off camera.
You did, right? You should have seen when the camera first went on, he was shoving things out of the way. There were piles of stuff. It was crazy.
Appearance that I'm all organized and things are going smooth.
You had to run and put that tar bucket back there. It was crazy the setup for this thing.
That was one of those. I had lost my original tar bucket, right? And so I was on the board of visitors at West Point, so they gave that to
Right.
me, when I helped bring the president there for an event or two.
Well, there's probably quite a few of us that would testify that tar bucket looks a lot better than the one you actually had back in the day.
I'm certain. I think I had the feathers because I was on brigade staff I was the vice chairman for honor, so I actually was a cadet captain. In the cruelty of cadetdom,
Yeah.
since I was on brigade staff for like a year and a half, because when you're an honor guy, you go down there your junior year, like second half of my junior year. So I lived on brigade staff for a year and a half, and so my first part of my cadet career, I was a corps squad football player. So
Yep.
I never marched any parades, and then the second half of my cadet career, I was on brigade staff, so I never marched any parades. And so lo and behold, graduation week, there are like 3 parades, I think, or whatever, like 3 big parades. And brigade staff, they're so egalitarian, right? So
Right.
They put everyone's names in a hat to draw for like these parades, and there's literally 3 parades during graduation week. And so my name got pulled to march in like a really big one. It wasn't graduation day; it was like the day before. My entire family was there, and they announced like Cadet Captain David Urban from Hopewell, Pennsylvania. And I'm like, this is pretty great, right?
That was your moment. That was it.
That was the zenith of my West Point career.
We all had one parade, and that was yours.
That was my parade, Paul, and I think I wore like the feathers for that parade, right?
Right.
Other than that, I was just a velvet plunger guy, right? My cadet career. Now, the funny part is, talking about cadet careers, like a couple of highlights and lowlights of my cadet career. I was not. I made the top of my half of our class possible, right? The funny part is, funny story I always tell people, Mike Pompeo, our classmate, was Secretary of State, when Trump was first elected.
Uh-huh.
The president didn't know Mike, and so a gentleman called me on the transition team and said, "Hey, what do you think about your classmate Mike Pompeo for BCI director?" I said, "Yeah, he's a great guy." He said, "Great, call the old man and convince him, that Mike should be the guy." So I called the president, Trump, and I said, Mike Pompeo, #1 in our class, et cetera, et cetera. And Trump wasn't so concerned about Mike Pompeo. He said, what were you? What number were you? I said, no, I was not. No, he goes, were you number 2? And I said, this president, I was not number 2. He goes, well, you number 3? I'm like, no. And so he kept going. He was just giving me the business, right?
That was a long conversation if he was going to go one by one, right?
Listen, I said, Mr. President, I made the top half of my class possible. And I said, but you know what? The great part about West Point is, Mr. President, he goes, what? I said, the old joke about medical school? He goes, no, what's that? I said, you know what they call the last guy in his class at medical school? He said, no, what? I said, doctor. I said, the same goes true at West Point. They call you lieutenant, whether you're the first person or the last person.
I've never had anyone, you're the only person I've ever heard of somebody asking about their class rank. In all my years, I never had anyone ask me about my class rank. So
the only reason I know about it is because the president asked me. I couldn't tell you what my class rank was. I know it was a low. It was a low. I was a two-time staff attendee at
A two-time staff attendee.
Yeah, so one of them I deserved, absolutely deserved. Differential equations.
Right.
I was mathematically eliminated from. I was good enough at math to know I was mathematically eliminated early in the semester
Right.
on differential equations. If you put a gun in my mouth today and ask me what it is, I could not describe the differential.
Even after all that extra training.
Even after doing it twice, I still couldn't tell you what it is. Right. So the dean, they got me. I don't know what it is. I've managed to live my life this long without having to use differential equations. So I think I'm okay. But again, the high points and low points during your cadet career. One of the very, very low points was I had this semester. I can't remember what semester it was, but it was a winter semester. I remember this. It was winter time, and I was making dean's list, right? So I was like so proud, right? I'm going to make dean's list, right? Pretty
Really?
good.
Okay.
Right? Which is a pretty big accomplishment. And so it must have been before my junior year because I was still in my company. I remember this, and I'll tell you why I remember all these things. So I had I'm laying in. You remember you had to break down your room before you went away on the holidays. You had to take like all your clothes and take it down to the basement and lock it up.
Trunk room.
Someone was going to break into West Point and steal like their overcoat or something. I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure why we had to do that, right? Like, but we also remember you had to take it all down to the locker room.
Yeah. The trunk room, right? Remember that?
Right, and secure your good shoes and your whatever, all the stuff you had to do, right?
Right.
So I remember I'm laying on my bed before going home for the holidays for Christmas, and you remember that was still back in the day when cadets had metal taps on their shoes, right?
Yes, I did.
Metal taps, and I could hear the guy walking. I could hear somebody walking down the hall. A lot of people had gone home for the holiday already, and it was Christmas holiday. And I remember I could hear like the click, click, click coming down the hallway, right, walking. And then it stopped at my room, and I hear the guys like, hey, Urban, Colonel Jones from the engineering department's on the phone for you, or engineering. So I'm like, Colonel Jones, engineering, like what could I I think for my courses, like I'm making dean's list, like what could this be? So I walk over, I go to the trunk room and get my good shoes, right? Because I gotta go shine them up quickly, and I walk across. It's snowing out now. It's like 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
At this point it's like dark at 5, right? So it's snowing. Everything's quiet. There's nobody really at West Point, and we had and that summer we had made big plans. With my colleagues at West Point, my classmates, we're going to go to Mykonos. Scott Poyer, Doug Gurry, a bunch of us. We had this big trip. We're going to go and have a great time. And so I'm walking over there, and I get to the mechanics department, the engineering department, and I see in there one of our classmates who had failed more classes than I could even tell you. Like he was a person who was definitely a rock. And when I was sitting in there, like I got a pit in my stomach, and for the first time, I was like, oh shit, maybe I failed something. Like,
maybe I'm on the wrong end of this one.
I'm like, what's going on? Like, and this guy's sitting there. He was ashen, right? Because he had probably failed like 3 classes, and so I go in, I knock on the guy's door. Cadet Urban reports, I'm standing in front of the guy's desk, and he proceeds to recount to me. This is hand to God story, Paul, of how he says, Cadet Urban, have you bothered, if you look at the syllabus, page 3, section 4D of the syllabus, this is for ME 203, solid mechanics. It says that the term end is cumulative, and that we reserve the right to fail you if you don't demonstrate adequate course knowledge on the term end, right? And so I'm like, all right, like, so what? I mean, I got a C in the course, right? I mean, I got a C, something, a C or C plus in mechanics. I failed the term end, right? But I still got a C plus in the course, right? And he said, well, even though you got a C plus, you got less than a 50% on your term end, so we're going to make you take it over again.
Oh, man.
That is the most unfair thing, because at one point
that is mighty uncharitable.
I mean, I was so sad at that point. That was the lowest I ever felt at West Point. I literally almost broke down crying in front of him. I'm thinking, dude, I got a C plus. You tell us, figure out how to order things and juggle chainsaws at West Point and set priorities. And I
And
did.
did that interfere with the fantastic trip over to Greece?
There was no trip to Greece, buddy.
Oh,
I was sitting. Not only that, I didn't make dean's list. I didn't get to go to Greece. I had to do
none of
something
it.
again for the second time, which I got like a B plus in the course, right? I mean, it was mechanics was like a pretty easy course. It wasn't a It was a fun, and the guy was nice who taught the course.
Yeah.
But that was an absolutely devastating moment in my cadet career when I was just. I mean, I walked back, Paul, from Mahan Hall. I don't know what barracks I'm living in, and literally, I felt like about
Yeah.
as sad and as depressed and as low as I could be.
We all had a few of those moments. But the good news is in your career in Washington D.C. now you use solid mechanics all the time.
Yeah, but I mean, but you know, it's one of those lessons in life, right? Like
Right.
I learned the good thing about West Point is I had, so many interesting stories. So, when I got elected to go be the vice chairman of honor, because you remember
Yeah.
it works. You're a company honor rep. Then all the company honor reps get together, and then at the time we did it in Ninninger Hall, and then you'd vote on who was going to be the chairman and who was going to be this. And so, I considered being chairman, running for chairman, and then I recounted how many of my classmates I knew that were going to probably be before an honor board.
Yeah.
I'm going to recuse myself. And so, no, it became, Paul Gross and I kind of sat down and worked out like a deal, like, okay, I'll run for this, you run for that. We'll be, it was all worked out, right? We kind of made a coalition government. So
Now let's just take a moment here, Dave. You sat down with Paul Gross and worked out a deal. Could there possibly been a foreshadowing of your future?
well, anyhow, so PJ, it was great and all worked out. So anyhow,
Right.
I have to go see the commandant at that time, who was General Boylan, right?
Yeah.
And so I go see Boylan, and at that time, my GPA, Paul, I had a 1.99 GPA. And so I go to see the commandant, right? And he's like, Cadet Urban, like, you're not going to graduate. Like, you know that. You should be really focused on graduation, not on extracurricular activities.
Right.
And he's like, I don't know if I should let you do this job. And I'm like, sir, give me a shot, right? Give me a shot at it. And it turns out, as soon as people find out you're a cadet captain, your grades go way up. It's like the halo effect, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
It was fine, but there's so many moments in your career where you look back. Another one was a funny one, and this is my last West Point funny.
Sure.
Well, there's two other funny stories. So, my parents are selling their house, and my brother went to West Point. My brother's a class of, I want to say, '94, and
I didn't know that. Okay.
so he was going through stuff at my parents' house, and he found a 4C, which I'm going to grab for you, Paul.
Oh, absolutely. Old 4Cs are the best.
Yeah, Paul. This is how.
There's a dog.
Oh, wait, this is how. Those are my dogs. Yeah. This is how deep down I am. Look, I got my bugle notes right here on my desk.
I love it. Mine are right over there.
Yeah, that's what a gray hog I am. Hold on, let me see if it's.
Well,
it used to be in here. It was.
in times of confusion or trouble, always just go back to the bugle notes. It'll steer you right.
The funny, Paul, is I got it stamped. Remember the little stamp you had for West Point? They give you that stamp.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. David J. Urban.
Like stamped everywhere, right? I still have my lockbox in my other room. Look, in here are some of my cadet photos, right? From the
Oh, that's great. Look at that.
Graduation photos. But so my brother says, "Hey, I found this 4C for you, right?"
Yeah.
And I'm going to read it because it's hilarious.
Please.
So, here, look, I'm not even making this up. For people who don't know what it looks like.
Here is the fourth class deficiency report.
This thing someday could be in a museum someplace, right? And
Yeah.
I need a little light here.
The Museum of Malfeasance.
So I'm going to read what it says.
Please, please.
Cadet delinquency report, right? And I gave it up on 17 October 1988. It was a bad day for me. On 17 October 1988 was a bad day for David Urban.
Okay.
It says the description of my offense, right? Gross lack of judgment, underlined, right? All caps, underlined, right? So, God, what could that be? I mean, holy heck, Paul, what could that be? Like, so gross lack of judgment. It says, I stopped Mr. Urban in the hall because he rounded 2 consecutive corners.
Ooh.
Oh, man, right?
One I could see, but two consecutive might be getting a little.
Yeah, and was moving nonchalantly, spelled completely incorrectly, right? Like whoever the guy who wrote this does not know. There was no spell check. Um, he was moving nonchalantly in the hallway, in front, directly in front of me, and continued to do so. Mr. Urban's disrespect towards an upperclassman has gone to the extreme. I highly suggest that he appear before fourth class board. Many other upperclassmen have also noticed his poor attitude. Signed, this guy, Cadet Corporal, whatever, right?
Yeah. And he as a cadet corporal, he was a junior. So I mean, you really riled up a junior. So
By the
usually
way,
the seniors are the one who came with such.
17 October 1988, terrible day for me, right?
Yeah.
When my brother gave this to me a few years ago, I laughed my ass off, right? So it's all of that. It's like, it's a matter of perspective, right? So this little green piece of paper, right?
Yeah.
Which made my life miserable. I'm sure that day and that week or whatever, right? Brought me so much joy 20, 30 years later because
Made it all worthwhile.
kind of like how stupid shit is in life, and don't you can't get caught up in the here and now because it's all meaningless. It's all like, this is a little bit of stoicism, right? Like there's no,
Yeah.
we're all kind of, it's like memento mori, right? Like we're gone. So don't get too focused on it because we're just dust in a few years.
And the lesson, of course, is you can have a bad day on occasion and round a couple corners and get caught.
I mean, dude. By the way, the follow on to this is this guy who was only named nameless was a complete jerk to me. I mean, really
Yes.
a jerk. And he tried to get me kicked out and all the thing.
That's usually the way it worked. There'd be one that would latch on and decide that they were going to.
And I was a pretty good cadet actually in terms of like military bearing and all that, right?
You were in B4, is that right?
B4 is a plebe, yes sir.
Yeah, because I was in C4, and you roomed with Darren Moore, and I roomed with Darren Moore in the upper class, and that's how we knew each other. Is that you guys were good friends?
Was there for a long time, and Doug Gurrian was my roommate with the Darren, and so this guy, some years later. So now fast forward, I'm a captain,
Right.
or a first lieutenant in the Army, and I'm at NTC, and I see this guy, and he comes up to me, and he's like, "Oh, weren't we in the same company together?" Blah blah, and I almost came to fisticuffs with him over that 4C, like, in 1991.
Yeah. So hey, you weren't so stoic back then, but now you can look back on it in the long view.
I saw the guy laugh, but like it was very close, right? It was like too close. It was only it was like 4 or 5 years after that 4C was written, right? And he made my life miserable every day. He tried to make it miserable. So
Well, you always did have a certain way in the world, we'll call it. So
it's one of those things, when you're there, as you recall, like you either, it's definitely a different experience. People are like, "What's West Point like?" And I'm like, "It's not like going to regular college. I assure you that, right?" And
no.
it's changed even more so. And I'm still pretty close to the academy. Like I said, I was on the board of visitors, and I still talk to the dean almost daily. And the soup, I stay pretty close to all these guys and what's going on at West Point. And it's a great institution. But when you're there, you experience it completely differently. I mean, the kids now today experience it completely differently than we did.
They do.
I saw that it's 100 days from Sandhurst competition. There's a little notice yesterday that went out, and Sandhurst now has become such a really big, meaningful event at West Point.
Yeah.
When we were there, it was kind of a throwaway, and now you get these cadets from all over the world that come, not only other universities, other ROTC programs, but other militaries come to compete. And so the place has gotten so much better in so many ways. Right?
Well, and I believe they all do Sandhurst of some form. So where Sandhurst was kind of a club when we were there, now it's fundamental to the experience.
Yeah, I think is really, really pretty spectacular for that. And so it's the place is. I always think it's the greatest institution on earth, right?
I think so. What did you study? Certainly not math or solid mechanics, as we just learned.
I guess an L guy, right? And,
yeah.
I love the leadership. That was my organizational leadership. Was my concentration area, right? Remember back then?
You did the organizational leadership, yeah.
couldn't
That's
major.
great.
Remember, we couldn't major till the year after.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I took every course I could on leadership at West Point. I thought, going to West Point, like leadership is kind of the shtick. I almost majored in Russian. I really like the Russian language.
I saw that in you were in the Russian club. Is that right? From the howitzer. I looked at your howitzer entry.
For Misha Solo, I don't know if you remember, you took any Russian. And the language labs. Remember the language labs we had at
I
West Point?
do.
They were like set up there with the little headphones on, and
State of the art, man, back in the day.
it was a crazy, crazy place. Listen, it was an institution where, I'm not sure how much I learned from, the academic portion of it, right? Because it was just like being in a barrel and somebody hitting you with a baseball bat every day, right? Being a 55-gallon drum.
Kind of, right?
That was my experience, right? The military part, the athletic part was fun, right? I thought the military stuff was fun. Athletics were always fun. Boxing, wrestling, flicker ball, right? All the kooky things we got to do, right, as cadets.
Yeah.
That was fun. The esprit de corps, the elan, the spectacular, nothing like it, right? All my friends, Paul, as you know, like to this day, my best friends in the world are all either our classmates or people from the Naval Academy or from the Air Force Academy. I my whole world is I've been out of the military for a long time, and most of the people who I associate with are not in the military anymore. But it's like those bonds that you form there are pretty strong, and not just with our classmates, but with other West Point grads. I'm very friendly with a wide range of people who went to West Point, older than me, all the way up to Pete Dawkins is a very good friend of mine, right? And
Yeah.
Jeff Dawkins is a spectacular guy, and it's really a great place to be associated with. I look at it and think how my life would be so much different if I didn't have that experience. Right? It really did make me the person I am, and I'm just grateful.
Well, you came from a small town in Pennsylvania. What was it about West Point, or how did that kind of form in your mind?
And Paul, the funny part. So here's the crazy story in my life, right? So you ever see this Tom Cruise movie, All the Right Moves?
Yeah.
He's a football player, like in a kind of a Milltown, gritty Milltown. That is the honest to God life story of David Urban, right? Like, so that movie in the film, it's called Ampipe High School, right? And it's named after the American Pipe Company. And in real life, my grandparents and I went to church in a town called Ambridge, named after the American Bridge Company. So it was U.S. Steel's American Bridge Company, and so in the movie, it's a U.S. American Pipe Company, right? So
Right.
same story, same kind of gritty. You play football, so you have to go work in the mill. It's a way out, right? And that's what it was. Like you got a scholarship. Everyone who was pretty good played football. My little conference, the Western Pennsylvania Intercollegiate Athletic League (WPIL), has like 5 Hall of Fame quarterbacks in Canton, right? So we've got a lot of quarterbacks who are there, which is really spectacular. Johnny Unitas, Joe Namath,
So a football town.
Danny Marino, big football. And so I played football in high school, and so I got recruited, right? I got recruited to play football. I wanted to go to Bucknell. That was my big thing when I was in high school. I thought, Bucknell is a good school in Pennsylvania, and I'm the first guy in my family to go to college. Everybody worked at the steel mills, right? My aunt,
Yeah.
grandparents, and everyone. And so I was the oldest kid, oldest urban, and so I started getting recruited, and it came down. Interestingly, my choices came down. The big choice came down between going to Harvard or going to West Point, and so I got accepted to Harvard. Believe it or not.
Okay.
There's no differential equations being offered at Harvard. I could have just gone. I'd have never had to take a math class ever at Harvard.
You would have never met that colonel.
I would have been so much better off academically at Harvard, interestingly, right? So I get accepted to Harvard, I get accepted to all these great schools, and a couple of like Princeton, I think Princeton, Penn, and my choice came down really between Harvard and West Point. And so,
What tipped it for you?
Paul, remember that, I'm just patriotic, remember that poster? They used to have a poster that says, most of the history we teach is made by those who taught. I mean, dude, I was hook and sinker on that.
We have to find the person who made that poster. Probably more of us went to West Point because of that poster than any other reason.
I think they may have taken General Lee off the poster, but
Well,
They probably put Shorts Cop or somebody on there now.
Somebody else. But it's a great line, right? It's a great line.
It's a great line, and it's true, right? And so I went there, so they pay, you get, when you're a pretty good football player, you get an NCAA paid recruiting trip. So they flew me, I got flown up to West Point, I stayed in a cadet
You
room.
did, okay.
Yes, I was recruited by the football team, and I got up there and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Now, interestingly, I'd gone to my trip to Harvard before this, and I tell this story, Paul, and I don't say this is not like, I don't say with any glee, it's just factual. That you get hooked up, they give you a couple kids to hang out with. You live in a room, they'd be like, hey, Cadet Urban, we're going to give you, Paul LaFontaine's a recruit. He's going to stay with you. You can take him around this weekend.
Yeah.
You take him to like the First E Club or wherever they took me. I can't even remember, a billion years ago. But I can tell you what happened before this is I went to Harvard, right? And, Harvard's a pretty interesting and pretty powerful place, right? And they pair you up with some of the team, and so I went out and we went to some, I don't know where we went, to a bar or something. When you're a kid, they take you. Drinking age was 18 at the time, I think. Remember back when we were there. And so we went out for the night, and these kids that I was with, these Harvard kids, they were young, a couple years older than me at the time. At the end of the night, Harvard has it in Cambridge. There's like the little Harvard. There's a little square where there's like stores and things.
Yeah,
and it was a winter night, and these guys go in and they're like, "Hey, let's see who could steal the most stuff in this like little convenience store, like a little bodega. Like who could take the most ho-hos, or who could stuff the most jacket, right?" And I'm thinking, like, I'm not doing that. Like I'm not stealing ho-hos from the bodega. That's not my shit. I'm not doing that. And these guys are drunk and they're just stupid kids, but they gave me some shit, and I thought to myself. And then the next week, I go to West Point, and they're like,
"There's no stealing of ho-hos."
Oh no, they're showing the videos of like these guys like fast roping down buildings, and they're
yeah.
Where have all the real men gone, and where are all the gods? Right? They're like guys like free tailgate and parachuting out of the back of aircraft, right?
Right.
It's just everyone's a badass, right?
Right.
I'm looking around and thinking, I want to be with these guys, right?
Right. I don't want to practice being a petty thief. I want to go
snowballs and ho-hos, right? And the Harvard folks did a great job. I mean, they found somebody who went to West Point for a few years, and then 2 years, and then came to Harvard and played football. And that individual said to me, the only reason I'm here is because I want to be a doctor, and I couldn't go pre-med at West Point. And so, if you want to have leadership, I love West Point. I mean, the kid, he was a second year at Harvard. He talked me into going to West Point. He didn't talk me.
No kidding.
The Harvard folks did a bad job in finding someone who loved West Point more than they did Harvard, almost, right? So
yeah, right.
It was a no-brainer. I mean, in the Academy, West Point to me has been, just really central to, my life in terms of, I can't imagine. I don't remember the last time I haven't gone to an Army Navy game or gone to West Point or talked to, like you said, Darren Moore, our roommate, right, and my friends. For all my friends that were there at the Academy, it's kind of maybe I just can't make friends. Maybe I have a tough time making
well, you found your people anyway.
My best friends in the world of all people that I've known since Rick Minicozy, right, stood next to me in Beast, right? Like I have a photo in my living room here of my Beast squad, and we're in front of some helicopter, like on the plane. I don't even remember taking this picture, Paul, but your squad on the plane at West Point, they must have had a helicopter. We all took pictures in front of them.
Yep.
But it's like, it's Minicozy and Jimmy Radecki, and I can go through and tell you the people in the squad. Now, a lot of the people didn't make it, but, a lot of those people I'm still friends with today, right? From that first day.
And so you ended up in artillery. So did artillery choose you based on your GPA?
No. Well, I mean, to a certain extent, I could have gone any of the combat arms, right? But,
okay.
I originally wanted to be you went to CTLT, remember that back in the day?
Yeah.
Leadership training, which was another great opportunity. I went to Europe, where I was a platoon leader. I was at M68-3 platoon leader.
No kidding.
Delta 2nd of the 32nd Armor Division, 2nd of the 32nd Armor. I think it's the 3rd Armor Division. and the death dealers. I remember that was their
That's a great motto. Yeah.
great. And we went up to our GDP position. We drove our tanks up in like the German countryside to where we were going to fight. Like if the balloon went up, we were going to fight the Russians, right? We
Yeah.
drove the tanks into the country. Dude, there was nothing cooler in my life. I thought this is pretty spectacular, right? I mean, it was really,
Right.
really cool stuff. And those tanks are big and they're cool. And at the time they were just getting rid of those, and the M1s were coming online. It's pretty shortly thereafter, but I don't know. It was a toss-up between armor or artillery for me, and I don't know what made made me make the decision. I thought the artillery would be different. I didn't want to be an infantry guy humping a rucksack, which
Yeah.
by the way I was, because I went.
You ended up doing it.
I ended up doing it because I didn't really understand. It shows you how much I learned at West Point. I didn't really understand that that's what I'd do for the first 2 years of my life. Was working in light infantry. I was a fire support officer for an infantry company, basically an infantryman, right? Freezing my butt off in the woods of Kentucky and in Iraq.
Because you ended up at Fort Campbell.
Yeah, I was at Fort Campbell. It was
Yeah.
great. A lot of people, a lot of fun people. The other crazy part, Paul, is I tried like hell to get a Ranger slot. Right back then,
Oh, did you? Yeah.
back then, Ranger school wasn't ubiquitous like it is now. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
you just fall out of bed, you go to Ranger school now. Back then, there were like 0 Ranger slots available for anybody, right? So, in my OBC class, we had Ranger PT like every day. We were competing for like 3 slots to Ranger school.
Yeah.
It's like Dan Hokinson or somebody who's like a cross country runner, right?
Right.
Running like 10-minute 2 miles. That's what getting the slots, right? I'm like, I was getting, I could run, I max out the PT test, but not, these guys are all running like gazelle, right?
Yeah.
And
There were some very athletic and capable guys that were with you in the artillery. I mean, that's a
do 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, whatever it was to max, right? You do that.
right.
Today, like, oh wow, you weren't like, the fastest man in the world. So
Yeah.
couldn't get a slot to Ranger school. And I was so depressed. And I finally, by the time I got a Ranger slot, it was 24 months in, and I was like, screw that, like I was already like, when you got to be in that mindset, you have to be hard. Right? When you're at West Point, that's one thing you are. Like, you
Yeah.
go to the gym a bunch, you're hard, you're used to being, you're used to kind of like living an austere life. And even in OBC, right? I woke up early, ran a ton.
You're still in the mindset of being a kid. Yeah.
Suffered, right? And the suffering. And 2 years in, I already froze a bunch. I was just like, I was married. I had a nice warm bed. And I'm like,
Right.
what shit is Ranger things for me anymore at this point, right?
Right.
And
Right.
in that respect, I wish I'd have gone, just because it's one of those achievements, one of the things that you wish you'd achieved, right? Like, I never lettered at West Point. Never got a letter because I got injured.
Yeah. What happened with the football? You what was your position?
So I was a nose guard. I have
Nose guard.
another claim to fame, Paul. Hold on, I'll show you this. I got to produce it. I got to produce the document so you know it's real.
Well,
Museum, Urban Museum. This is it. Can you see this?
yeah.
1982 West Point football guide. That's my claim to fame. I'm listed in here as a top plebe prospect. This is the zenith of
There
my
it is.
Army football career right here in this magazine. That's it. That's why I have to have it.
All that matters. All you need is that. Just leave it at that. That's good enough.
That's right. I have to prove it. It's like, this is me. This is what I did. I'm in here, right here, highlighted in the roster. I even highlighted it so people could see it, right? When I find
Right.
it. So I got a really bad spinal injury, right? And so,
Oh no. Well, at the academy?
yeah, West Point,
Yeah.
lineman. So you're arching your back. You get like
Sure.
you get these like a cracked vertebrae, basically is what I had. And I had really bad sciatica. And so I was at Keller Army Hospital for almost 2-3 months on and off. It was really bad. A lot of
Oh boy.
steroid injections and they wanted me to turn back, right? And they're like, look, you're not going to make it academically. You got to turn back. And I don't know if you remember, but like plebe year, you don't want to go become a class 87 guy, right? You're a class 86 person.
Right.
So I fought like hell. I stayed there, and my academic failures had nothing to do with my back being screwed up. But that was it. I was done, and I barely barely could. I couldn't walk. I mean, I was really in a lot of pain. I'd wear those stupid profile tennis shoes, right? When you come
And that's a
back,
terrible year to have that happen. I mean, plebe year, you're trying to keep up with all the activity, right?
softball. That was not a fun experience. And so funny story, Paul, is so President Trump, I'd go in with the team with the football team. The Army would come in and we when they win the Commander in Chief trophy,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be in with the president. And so somehow he found out that I played football at West Point, and he always say to me, like, people tell me you're a great football player at West Point, David. I'd say, Mr. President, like, I played like one JV game and I was done. Right? Like this, I tell the story, like the highlight of my career.
Although you did pull out that magazine with the highlight in it.
Oh, I mean, repeatedly, I would tell the president, I'd say, Mr. President, I'm not that good a football player, right? Like, not
Right.
like I'd tell him over and over and over, and he'd get places and he'd say to people, did you know that David was a good football player at Army? I'd be like, Mr. President, I really not. So we were doing an event in Western Pennsylvania,
Right.
in Beaver County. So I'm from Beaver County, Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm gonna try to find this because it's so funny. It's 30 seconds long. I'll only play the beginning of it. So
Yeah.
this is the president. Let me pull this up.
And one of my good friends from Beaver County, David Urban. David, where's David? David, thank you, David. Great football player, great athlete.
So
Between that and the magazine, what more do you need?
So so I told Kurt Gutierrez, our classmate Kurt Gutierrez, right? So Kurt's been a good friend. Kurt was the captain of our team, and Rob Healy, all these guys.
Sure.
I said, it's settled, man. I'm going to the Army Hall of Fame now, buddy. Like, it's over.
It's done.
It's settled. Donald Trump says I'm a great football player. I'm a great football
Done.
player. So
that
was it, man.
Set it up, you're good to go.
And you remember our team was really good, right? We had really
Good
teams that we were there. When we got there, it wasn't so good, but when we ended up with Jim Young, who was the coach, ended up playing the wishbone, and team was really good. And so Donnie Smith and Dougie Black and all our classmates were really, really good football players. So kind of a funny story there.
That's great. Well, in the long view of it, you're the one who got the shout out in Beaver County anyway.
No, it's all that matters. Like, it doesn't matter what really happened,
Well, there you go. so, but I saw, I just did a little, looking at your LinkedIn, things like that. So you went over to Desert Storm and did a good job, basically, right? So things went well for you.
That's so funny. Like, I was trying to go to law. And this is the Army. Remember, so the Army in the late early 90s, late 80s was kicking people out. They let our classmates. So a lot of our classmates were allowed. They said, "Leave. We don't have jobs. Please leave early." Right.
Yep.
Letting people go left and right because they didn't have spots for them. That's what people don't even remember that. I think about the Army then. And so I had planned at that point in time, I was going to go to law school. I knew I wanted to go to law school, and I was trying to go to be I wanted to stay in, be an Army lawyer, right? I wanted to be a JAG officer, and the only way to go to become a JAG officer from the Army is to go through the funded legal education program, which you apply for. There's a big application process, and you apply, and so I thought, well, I'm going to get, and so because of that. I worked for the staff judge advocate for Fort Campbell, which is a guy named Max. What was his last name now? Anyhow, great Max Squires. Max Squires was there. He was a great guy.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark Martins. Remember, Mark was one of the first captains a couple of years ahead. Mark was a lawyer there, but really smart people. And so they'd have Colonel Squires. Every command he'd have, he'd pick a young captain or a major who was going to law school to be the Article 32 hearing officer. So I was a special duty assignment. I did all of the Article 32 hearings for Fort Campbell. So, Article 32 are the grand jury. There's no grand jury in the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Right.
The 32 hearing officer sits and listens to the evidence and writes up a probable cause, whether there's probable cause or not, proceed to a trial, full courts martial, right? And so I was the permanent 32 hearing officer. So I heard all these cases, and then I'd write up a report to the commanding general saying, I think there's evidence to go, or I think there's not evidence.
Right.
And these cases there were no close cases. These are all overwhelming. That they would bring cases that were
Yeah.
a lot of people who are in trouble, a lot of child abuse, spousal abuse.
Yeah. Bad stuff.
Some things that were pretty easily substantiated. And so I was doing that, and then I'd also do reports of survey and line of duty. I had to write up all these reports. I was basically an administrative guy. I was working at the headquarters for the staff judge advocate, but also for the CG.
Now, you'd gone and done some law studies, or you just did that as an officer?
At that point, Paul, right? So you're just a regular old knuckle dragger.
No kidding.
I read a lot. You kind of learn it when you're.
Yeah.
So I was doing that for a while, and then poof, the invasion of Kuwait happens.
Yeah.
And I was a pretty good officer. I was a one block officer. Best, if I had my OERs, I'd pull them out and read them to you, brag, right? Like Cadet Urban or Lieutenant Urban's the best lieutenant out of 64 kind of thing.
Yeah. Good for you.
Promote to general officer below the zone. So this is why I think like, okay, I can probably get the split program and to be staying and do the JAG stuff. But so the war breaks out, and then my all the battalion commanders back in the Vardy started fighting over who would get David Urban to come back. And,
Is that right?
So it was a little flattering, but also a little scary. So I'd never been a fire direction officer in a battery. So first guy that calls me up, he's like, "You're going to be the battalion fire direction officer, right?" And I'm like, "Sir, listen, I was never a battery fire direction officer. We're going to war. I'm not worried about shooting out of the box on this. This is like real stuff, right? Don't worry." He was like, "Super, you're the great leader, Urban. We need you." So I'm like, I pack my ruck stuff, leaving in a day and a half, and then the next day I get a call from another guy. He's like, "You're going to be our S1. Colonel Jones was being greedy. He had too many officers, and the Vardy commander says I can have you now." And I'd be like, "Okay." So we're leaving in 2 weeks. I'd pack my stuff, tell my wife we're leaving in 2 weeks now, right? And then I got yanked again. The guy's named Colonel McKeenan. He was the division fire support officer. He was an 06, right. And he called me up. He said, "Urban, you're not going with any of those guys. You're coming with me." Like, okay, okay, sir, whatever you say. So I was the fire support officer for the assistant division commander for support, right? So
really, that's great.
How it works, right? Every unit has every movement. The commanding general, CG, right, who was Binford P, right? Benny P was the CG of the 82nd, 101st. So, Colonel McKean was his fire support officer. And then Hugh Shelton, who was the assistant division commander for operations, right? He had a major / lieutenant colonel who was his fire support officer who worked. And so, Colonel McKean was at the main talk with the CG, right? And then this major, I can't remember his name, he went with Hugh Shelton in a Chinook, which was the jump talk, and they moved around. And then I was the fire support officer for a guy named Ron, I believe it was Ron Smith. He was the assistant division commander for support. So he was the S, right?
Right.
And in peacetime, he never really had a fire support officer, right? Because, what do you do in peacetime? They're not really doing training on the field. And so when I went out to the desert, I had to try to figure out training and support, how I was going to support the rear area, which was all the fuel guys, the rearming guys, right? All the people, when the 101st would cross the LD, they have to come back and refuel, rearm, and do all these things, right, that the 101st does with all, 500 helicopters.
Right.
So when you go to war, none of these guys they've never called for fire before in their life, right? They've never done any of these things, right? So I put together a big fire support plan for the rear area and integrated, all these units were out in like little pods in the desert, right? So
right.
They're all scattered about in the desert, and they're little circles that look down there. There's like the main talk, and then in front of it were all these little units, the refueling guys, the maintenance guys, and they're all out in the desert with, concertina around them. And so I figured out how to. You remember we had the Slugger? Remember the Slugger, Paul? Which was the GPS. It was the
Yeah.
GPS you get off the shelf. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, those are brand new. Nobody had those in the war, and so we got them. And so I had surveyed in some firing sticks. I took pickets, like the pickets you use for a concertina.
Sure.
I drove them into the ground. I surveyed them in. I put glint tape on them. I put streamers on them, right? And then I put them on a map and gave them to like the little guy in the units in these little circles. And I said, you look out with your binoculars. See those out there? That's like firing point 1. That's firing point 2. That's firing point 3, 4. They're all surveyed in. Here's what you got to say, a little script. You call for fire.
Yeah.
Here's how to read it. This is what you do. Here's the map. Here's a map. This is where it is on the map. So you can adjust and call for fire. So I made a remedial course for each of these folks on how to do this, right? And then I would take those other things and I'd integrate it and give them back to the people on the other end, saying, if these guys ever call you, here's like the cheat sheet, right? And then I went down to like the JSOC guys and figured not the JSOC, the ASOC, where the planes are being left from, right? And said, how do we get diverted air? Could you get air assets? How do we get that? So I figured this all out, and then I presented that all to the CG and everybody. I presented to General Shelton and General Lee and these guys, and you thought that I invented the effing light bulb. And they were like, oh, you did this? Like, yeah, isn't that my job? Isn't that what I was supposed to do, right? I'm a fire support officer. I'm supposed to do these things. And they were so blown away that it's I ended up getting a Bronze Star for that. They're like, you're like the best thing since the invention of the door, Irvin.
That's great, though.
Yeah, it was actually, Paul, I felt like I added significant value right there.
Sure.
And if we ever had to like fight, that those folks could actually fight because of what I did, right? I felt like pretty good about that.
Yeah, good for you. Well, there was a huge amount of activity going on back in the S part of the organizations, right? Yeah. So getting those folks up to scratch was important.
Yeah, when I got there, right? So like I did on the TO&E, right? There's no, there's a slot for fire support guy, but there's no, I got some hand me down NCO, and we didn't have a vehicle. I didn't have a Humvee. Remember back then, Humvees were brand new, right? Everyone had that was the thing. Everyone had Humvee. Well, we get to Saudi Arabia, and the kicker of all kickers is I get a 1991 Mitsubishi Pajero. It was like the next year's version, right? It was like
we even gifted them for some reason. Yeah, our battalion got one as well. Yeah, we had one. A chief warrant officer grabbed it.
Captain Urban has this vehicle, right? Air conditioning. It had a CD player. It had the shocks in the seats that went up and down, right? It was a spectacular vehicle, right? It had leather. Like, this was like a 70,000. It was a luxury SUV, right, in the desert, and everybody was pissed that I had this truck, right? Everyone's like, why does Urban get this? And they're like, because he doesn't have a vehicle. And they're like, why can't this be mine? And they're like, because you have, you have headquarters 4, whatever the truck was, right? Like,
right.
I would drive around to all these meetings and show up in like air-conditioned luxury. It was beautiful.
Now, classmates are all going to be flabbergasted to hear that you worked out a program where you had the Montero with the leather seats while the rest of us were in Humvees.
Yeah, no, Paul, it was one of the craziest, most hilarious, like my whole war experience. I remember, so one time we're driving, I was, I was in this, in the rear top, right?
Right.
Top, we didn't have any tents. We had no tents. And so I went to like the supply depot and I hand receipted like 10 GP larges, right? Like, got them. And these people were like, Urban, where'd you get these? I said, I went back to the rear area in my Pajero and I found them, right? And I just signed for them. And Paul, when you're in like this giant desert warfare, like nobody's saying like, do you have the authority? I'm like, here, give me it. I'll sign for them, right? And then like 5 tons show up with these tents. I'm like, I got tents for us. I'm like, hooray, right? Nobody asks questions, right? I'm like, I need somebody to hand receipt, like some NCO sign for me. And I'm like, okay, tents are there, right? I mean,
very few people tell the story because most people were in positions and just deploying. But back in the division headquarters, of which I was a part as well, for the 24th. There was that horse trading for people and equipment. I mean, you get the multiple commanders calling you, no, you got to come with me. You got to come with me. That was going on all the time. It was super interesting that you experienced that. Yeah.
I was grateful to get to do what I did there, right? And back then, everyone's chomping at the bit to go to war, and you wanted to be involved.
Yeah. You wanted to do your part.
Yeah, I was bummed that I had to stay behind, right? Like the war went so quickly, right? It was over. We were done. It was like that's it, right? You're there for all those months. I mean, we got there. The 101st got there. I think we went like August 8th or something, right? We were there like whatever the day was that happened. We were there like 4 days later, right?
Yeah.
We sat in the desert sweating at King Fahd Air Base for months and months and months, right? And it was torturous. I got to do a lot of, I took the initiative a lot and did a lot of very interesting things. Like I worked with the 16th Special Operations Squadron, the AC-130 gunship guys, on air-based ground defense at King Fahd because they needed somebody to do it, and I volunteered, right? So
yeah.
I went to the airfield, and I went to JSOC headquarters there, and I got to do a lot of fun things with those guys just because, I put my paw up. Nobody else was doing it. Everyone else was like, oh, it's not my job. I'm like, hell, I'll do it. It's fun, right? And
yeah.
So I got exposed to a lot of different things.
That's cool.
And, and I think at the time, I would say this, Paul, when we went there, I was always questioning like our ability to kick ass, right? I was like, can we really do this, right? Can we really, if we'd go to the field, we'd shoot at Fort Campbell, we'd go to NTC, right? We do all these things, right? And I always thought like, when the rubber meets the road, can you do it, right? And when we got there, when I'd fly around with General, I'd fly around with General Adams, and on the helicopter, we'd look over the desert, we'd go places. And in one week it was an empty desert. The next week it looked like the port of Los Angeles, right? I mean, the amount of people moved in and the equipment. And I remember we moved up to our fighting positions. We drove up along Tapline Road. Remember, Tapline Road was big.
I remember Tapline Road, yeah.
101st was extremely on the far left flank of the whole battle. But I remember we got to an intersection, and it reminded me of something out of World War II. Like there were British MPs and U.S. MPs and French MPs, and everyone's directed traffic, and there's trucks and tanks, and I thought, man, this is incredible. And the U.S. military, I think, distinguished itself so incredibly during that conflict. And it really did give America confidence because, prior to that, you remember, it was a long time. It was Vietnam, then a long time of nothing, right?
Yeah.
We're questioning whether, the military was up for it or not, and there was a lot of guilt about how the veterans got treated. And so when we came back, when we went, it was just such a different operation. Right? I remember I think we went on, I don't know how you went. We went like Tower Air, Atlas Air, one of these like, CIA-owned airlines, right?
Right.
Flight attendants were coming in and giving us like pillows and blankets. I'm like, it's 143 degrees here. I'm not quite sure I need a blanket, but it was.
Because we went over at the same time. We were part of the 18th Airborne Corps. We deployed right away, so we were over there for a long time as well. Yeah.
You remember all it was really just a spectacular thing, and I count myself lucky, Paul. I think like our class and our generation, maybe our class specifically, our year groups, we got to do a lot of very interesting things, right? I mean, not like I look at classes subsequent to us, right? All these kids that went to Afghanistan and Iraq, for 6, 7, 8 times. They were deployed so many times. Now, I can't imagine that. I'm grateful for their sacrifice, but it is really insane the amount of combat these younger kids are seeing and have gone.
Yeah, years of it, right?
Yeah,
years of it. They rotate out for a short period and go back again.
We got a little taste, but not to the extent where we were burying classmates or burying friends like they had.
Right.
Where people come home and they're permanently disabled or kind of really bad trauma that they still live with. So we were very fortunate not to have to go through a lot of that in some regards. And it's a blessing that we got a little taste of it, but not have to suffer through a great deal of it. Right?
So even back before Desert Storm, you had an eye on a legal career, and then after, how did that go? You ended up going to law school after you got out?
Well, the funny part again. Here's another funny story. My not knowing anything about anything. So I'm in Desert Storm and or Desert Shield at the time, right?
Yeah.
And somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, there's a colonel on the phone for you from West Point. Wants to talk to you." I'm like, "West Point?"
I'm not again.
I'm like, "Did I fail something? Did I going to get me again for something?" Right? Later, I know I got my diploma. They can't take it back, right?
I'm never going to make it to Greece.
I schlep it up to wherever the phone was.
Yeah.
It's this guy. He's like, "Hey, my name's Colonel Jones, and I'm a the deputy at the social department. We see you didn't get picked up for the FLEP program, but we'd like to offer you an opportunity to come teach in the social department, right?"
Okay.
And I said, "Why would I want to do that?" And they're like, "It's a really good deal. We've got," and Paul, little did I know, and you know this as well, that's like getting the Willy Wonka golden ticket, right?
Yeah, right.
Department. Everybody goes to HBS or Stanford, and they come back, and they're Jedi Knights, and and they go on to have a lot of these careers. And knucklehead David Urban, I'm telling this guy, like, why would I want to be a social? Why would I want to come? Like, this is what's called no mentor, right? The lack of mentorship, where someone would have pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Captain Urban, this is a pretty good opportunity for you. You should probably look really hard at this, right?" And I'm like, I'm pretty certain I want to go be a lawyer. And the guy's like, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, it's great." Years later, I found out the guy, that gentleman and I reconnected, kind of laughed about it a little bit. But, I got out, went to law school in Pennsylvania, a Pennsylvania resident. And so went to Temple University because it was a whopping $6,000 a year, right? So I figured if I didn't get into Harvard or Yale, one of the top law schools in America, I was going to go to one of the most affordable. And those were the places in Pennsylvania. So I went to Temple for law school, and then I went to graduate school at the same time. Interestingly, it wasn't a joint program at the University of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Master's in government public administration. And when I was in graduate school / law school, one of the guys, I played squash. So, Paul, you got your lifetime sport. Remember at West Point? What's your lifetime sport? You had to take one, remember?
Yeah.
So mine was squash. Right?
Squash.
Squash. A lot of people took golf, tennis. So mine was squash. Where I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, if you said squash, someone would give you a zucchini, right? There was no squash courts where I grew up. So, it was a great sport, right? And interestingly, Paul Asiante, who was the squash coach at West Point, ended up going to be a very famous guy. He's the most winning coach in NCAA history. He coached the Trinity squash team in Hartford, Connecticut. They went for 14 years without losing one game. Not one.
Is that right?
One game. He's an incredible guy, a legendary squash coach, but he started at West Point. Great. He wrote a book called Run to the Roar. It's a really interesting book about squash. I'd recommend everyone read it. He's a great guy.
That's amazing. It's such an individual sport to have that winning record.
Yep. And he recruited. What he did was he went, squash is huge in the world. So he went all over the world to like Egypt and Pakistan and places.
He's got a real international crew.
And they came to the United States. They just kicked everybody's ass. They beat them mercilessly, right?
Yeah.
And Nasiani's a great guy. So anyhow, I started playing squash at West Point, played intramurals, and it's a great game. Huge, great workout, and just great hand-eye coordination. A lot of fun. I still play today. But in graduate school, I played a lot. And so this one guy said to me, "Hey, do you want to play squash with Arlen Specter, Senator Arlen Specter?"
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. Back then, I thought senators were really a big deal, right? I was like, holy shit, a U.S. senator? Oh my gosh, like, of course. And so Specter lived in Philadelphia, so he'd come home every Friday, Saturday, Sunday. He'd be home, and he'd go back to Washington on Monday or someplace in the state. And so this guy said, "You want to play with Specter?" And I said, "Sure." So I started playing squash with Arlen Specter in 1992, my second year of law school and graduate school. And I played with them, a lot. And so I was always in town studying, right? So I was either, studying in the library because I went to law school.
But there was the introduction to Senator Specter there was some agenda there, right? I mean, they wanted to connect you, I imagine. It wasn't just because you were an outstanding squash player.
It was a squash. The guy played squash every day. He was like fresh meat. I was fresh meat for squash. Literally.
That's terrific. Literally, you squashed your way into the congressional halls.
It's the honest God's truth, Paul.
That's terrific. So it paid off all that time ago. When you learned at West Point, it's a lifetime sport. It worked.
And I'm still playing squash today, right? So I started playing squash with Specter in '92. And in '97, so 5 years later, because I played squash with him every weekend, squash, and I was a lawyer. The kind of law I did, Paul, was public finance, municipal finance. So
Yeah.
I structured municipal debt for cities, hospitals,
Mhm.
government entities, right? So
And where were you living then, right after you got out of the Army, after you finished your degree?
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I worked for a big law firm, right? Big law firm doing this, and this is when you get taxed. If you pay your taxes right to your town and your state, your city, that's what your tax dollars go for, is to pay debt service on bonds that they use to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of political, right? And that you meet a lot of political people because the debt's issued by these folks, right? A lot of it's given out by governments. So let me get 1 second here. Put you on hold.
Yeah.
Person's here. Hold on. Okay. All right. Go. My neighbor, my 90-year-old neighbor, comes and walks our dogs every day.
Oh, is that great? Yeah, good for you. I got my guys right out here.
Yeah.
My dog's over here. So
Yeah.
So you're working for a big firm doing municipal debt, and
right. But you meet a lot of people, and so Spectre one day said, "Hey, you want to come work for me?" And I said, "Doing what?" And so was running the state. Actually, he didn't ask me. He asked me, but I didn't think he asked me. The staff guy, the chief of staff, said, another funny story. At the time, the biggest salary that first year associates in 1997, I guess, no, 1994, when I graduated from law school, starting salaries for lawyers was $64,500 in the city of Philadelphia, right? That was big money. And
yeah,
DC, I think, was like 68,000. New York was 72,000, right? So, to allow for adjustment. And I worked, you work like basically a slave. You're an indentured servant, right? You're
yeah.
thousands of hours as a young lawyer. And I honestly was like yearning to go back and dig foxholes. That's how bad it was, right?
Right.
And so I was in my second or third year, maybe my third year. And by the way, you make like your second year, you make like $65,000, right?
Right.
Get a $1,500 raise or something. So maybe at the time I was making $67,000, $68,000. Not all the money in the world, and working like literally 3,000 hours. I'd go to work in the morning and not come home until 3 in the morning, right? And it was a lot of stress and tax driven, and not a great existence. And so this kid says to me, the chief step says, what do you get to run the state? You do all the politics stuff. And I said, sure, I don't really know. And he said, listen, the bad part is we can only offer you 99,000 to start. And I said, I'll take it. I was like, I'll take it.
Well, that is terrible news. I'll take it.
It was like it was when you're making 69,000 and you're getting, or 69. Let's just say, well, I don't think it was 69. It was a $30-some-thousand raise, which
right.
Which was it was like $3,000 a month, which was life altering at the time, right?
Right.
And so it was actually a fun job. And then the chief of staff quit about 3 months later, and I became the chief of staff.
And that introduced you to the Washington milieu, right?
I ran my senator's campaigns,
But I have to tell this story now. We were sitting having an ice cream at the Firsty Club back in 1985, 86, and you said, I'm going to Washington and I'm going to work there. I'm going to become a lawyer and go to Washington and work there. You said that back then to me.
How prescient. I said a lot of other things that haven't come true, Paul, too. Right? I said I was
statistically, I guess I'm statistically, I'm the one who got the right one.
Exactly, right? I've said a lot of other things, and a lot of them come true. It was like, I've had, and during that career, Paul, during my time with Senator Specter, he was a very powerful senator, like one of the most powerful.
Sure.
He'd been around a long time, and so subsequently, through my visits with him, I had experiences which I'd never get in the world, right? So like,
right.
I had numerous, 15, 16 trips and encounters with, Yasser Arabat, Hafiz al-Assad, Hosni Mubarak, King Hussein of Jordan. I went with Specter for the first trip. For the first visit of an American we flew from Andrews Air Force Base to Havana, Cuba, in the year 2000, I think, and had really long meeting with Fidel Castro, which I've got incredible stories
Yeah.
and memorabilia. We're sitting at dinner. I sat right next to him. Spectre sat across from him, and I've got a great photo. He's got his arm on my shoulder talking to me, and he spoke English. Although he worked through interpreter. As
Right.
most of these foreign leaders talk through interpreters, even though they speak English. And so at the end of the night, we have a little place card there folded, and it says Comandante El Jefe Fidel Reyes Castro. Mine says Senor David John Urban, and I had a sterling silver Montblanc pen. I think it's in someplace in another room, and I had it in my pocket. I said, Mr. President, would you sign these for me? So he signs Fidel Castro on his, he signs Fidel Castro on mine, and then he puts the pen in his pocket. And he just starts talking, and I'm like, excuse me, Mr. President, I need that pen. It's like a very expensive pen. I need that back. Oh, sorry. It was an incredible experience, Paul. Fidel Castro was we talked about the Bay of Pigs, Cuban Missile Crisis, the assassination, right? So every time we go to these places, like Spectre, he'd let me ask questions. Like, David, what do you want to ask any questions? Like, with Arafat, with Hafiz al-Assad.
Yeah.
These guys are really bad guys, right? And so the Spectre would allow me to ask questions, partake, and participate. And, I did a lot of stuff. Sometimes I'd take, this is back before cell phones existed, right? So
Right.
mini little cameras and stuff, and I would do a lot. I'd try to be like junior G-man for the CIA. I'd take a lot of pictures and stuff.
Yep.
And bring it back from. So it was a really great opportunity, cool experience to do that for those years, and I was very grateful. Spectre's a very smart guy, and just the point that it comes where I had a lot of debt from graduate school and law school, maxed out making 140 grand, living in DC. You can't really. I couldn't pay my student loans, and
Yeah.
my car.
Barely making ends meet in that city, right?
No, it's tough. My car, it was falling apart, and I had to go get I had to get some teeth. I had to get some fillings, and I couldn't pay my bills. Right? I just couldn't pay my bills anymore.
Right.
So I had to move on, and so I started went to go work for a lobbying firm, and been doing that for a long time.
18 years I saw in your LinkedIn.
Yes, I did. I ran American Continental Group for that long. I worked for Spectre from 1997 through 2002. Funny story, Paul. The day before I started chief staff for Spectre, I was laying in bed in Washington, D.C. in the Washington Post style section. It had said 10 worst jobs in Washington. It's Labor Day. And it says the guy who puts puppies to sleep, the guy who cleans porta potties, and then one of them is staffer for Arlen Spectre. I'm laying in bed. I'm going to work. I'm going to be the chief staff guy the next day. Thinking, hope this isn't a harbinger of things to come. But
Article 32 specialist at Fort Campbell and working for Arlen Spectre. You've had them all.
So I've been, interestingly, Paul, I've had a lot. If you look at my resume, I've had 40 jobs. I can't keep it. I can't keep a job, but I end up getting great opportunities. And
Wait, we see you. We see you on the television, and you're a household name. How about that? What is it about that world that you like? What is it about that world that draws you in when it comes to the type of work you do?
Yeah, so a lot of it is, so there are a couple pieces, like the lobbying piece. Everybody, it's people don't know this. If you look at the First Amendment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows the freedom of the press part, right? That's the first part of the First Amendment. The second part of the First Amendment is there's a comma. The second part is petition the government for redress of grievances, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what lobbying is, right? So petitioning the government for redress of grievances. People, large and small, companies, individuals, associations, come to Washington to try to make their lives better, right? So it's interesting to participate in that part of government because democracy is a participatory form of government, right? And people think I can't really affect it. You can. I mean, people do really have an impact, right? Talking to their congressmen, senators, and maybe not the president, but your governor, your elected local representatives. People really do have an impact there, and it really is. It's really super interesting to be a part of that and how it's helping shape policies on a wide range of different subject matters. So that part of my job is super interesting, and the day-to-day television stuff. I try to present myself as a voice of reason and as a Republican voice of reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though I'm a Trump supporter, I like Donald Trump. I don't worship Donald Trump, right? I
Yeah.
try to present the facts to people, literally facts. I agree with the president on a lot of things. Sometimes I disagree.
Uh-huh.
I can tell you that he, says to me, like, you're not always great to me, David. And I said, Mr. President, I always tell you the truth. And so, I think my job is to try to convince people like that what, it's like the marketplace of ideas, Paul, right? That's what
Mm-hmm.
democracy should be, right? So here's our ideas, here's your ideas. Let the voters pick which ideas they think are the best, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of what I try to do is I try to convert, Trumpism to ideas that people can understand, right? In hopefully a manner that's presentable and friendly and accessible, right?
Those of us who know you and see you on TV, like back in 1980s, we could have said you'd be good at that kind of high pressure thing. How did you develop the
Yeah.
ability to keep your calm? And I mean, you get in those very combative situations on TV. That's a skill. That's not something that I mean, you have to practice keeping your cool in that thing, right?
100%, Paul. You're right. I mean, it is. It's very strange, when you. It's like anything else, right? It's like hitting golf balls or doing anything, Paul. The
Yeah.
more you do it, the better you get at it, right? I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure, when you started doing this podcast, you weren't great, and now you're great, right? Because you've done it a bunch, right? And so the more you do it, the better you get. And there's a rhythm to it, right? There's a
Yeah.
rhythm.
Yeah.
There's a way. I always try to remember like my family and friends in the places that I grew up, right? What's important to people that I know, like my high school friends, I'm still friends with, right?
Mhm.
What's important to real people in America? I try to translate that, try to make it, accessible to real people, not just, kind of people who watch fancy programming, right?
Right. Right.
Think they're like, the smartest people in the world. But it's very hard. My wife will say, "How do you think you did today?" Like, "No, I didn't do so great today." They're not every day. Not every day you're getting a good
Yeah.
call.
Yeah.
Some days I suck. I'm like, "Man, that wasn't very good. I didn't do a good job articulating what I wanted to, and I really didn't do a great job." And there's not really a great deal of preparation. They'll say, "We're going to talk
Right.
about Davos today," and the president's speech at Davos,
Right.
right? And then you get there and it could be anything about it, right? So you got to be prepared.
Yeah, because you're never talking about stuff that you can prepare for. It's usually like it just happened this morning. Come on and have a comment about it, and you're on the spot, right?
Yeah, real time news today. So there is kind of an art to it, and
There is
look,
an art to it. I think people don't understand how much of an art to it is. Look at you just getting on there and talking, but there's very carefully crafted skills you're using there.
and also your point, Paul, right? Like people, I mean, I've been on TV with sometimes with some people who are really, I mean, just off the charts vitriolic and
Yeah.
say really meaningful things to me, right? So people don't know. Like, while I'm a Trump supporter, I also just authored a op-ed in USA Today was published nationally on supporting gay marriage, right? And so,
Mhm.
I don't fit in a box neatly, right?
Right.
And so people see, oh, you're a Trump person, you must be this, you must be that. And so you get on with some people who don't know you, and they're just full of vitriol, and
Right.
that doesn't happen so frequently anymore, but it used to on CNN back in the day. And it really is difficult when people start to screaming at you
Right.
about stupidity. At that point, if you realize the absurdity of it all. It's really kind of easy not to get engaged because it's just so absurd. And look, there's certain things I don't do. I don't participate. There's a very popular show at 10 o'clock on CNN with Abby Phillips, and you'll see my colleague Scott Jennings on there fighting every night. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's very combative, and I don't do that show. I just refuse to do it. I just
Well,
not,
that
not
begs the question, kind of, what's your thought about your path to doing less of it, retiring, whatever? I mean, where's your head on kind of the future for
I
you?
can't I mean, listen, I don't do nothing well, right? I'm like when I go on vacation, like I don't sit around. I'm not a
Right.
like I read a book and then I'm like, okay, like that was interesting, and then I play some tennis, like okay, that's fun, right? Like
Right.
I love working a lot. I mean, there's good pressure and bad pressure, right?
Sure.
bad stress. I enjoy work. Work is good stress for me. Like I find it enjoyable. Um,
Okay.
I would not do well with a retired person, right?
Yeah.
I don't like golf. I think I'll always work. Listen, I'm blessed. I'll work until people stop wanting me to work, right?
Yeah.
That's what will happen, Paul. People will tell me it's time to retire because people won't call me to help them anymore. That's when I'll retire.
Yeah.
That's when I know it's time to quit.
It's a great way to think about it. Well, I don't want to get in trouble with your family. Is there any kids? You want to? Is there anything anybody we should mention to just keep you out of trouble?
I got a great wife. My son works for the Florida Panthers. He's proudly sporting a Stanley Cup ring, and
There you go.
got a great wife who's really supportive of me, and it's
Good.
He's got this. Paul, if I died 10 years ago, Paul, I'd have lived a full life, right? Like I am incredibly.
You've packed a lot in, my brother.
I am so grateful, right? Like when you walk through the cemetery and you go back there,
Yeah.
you remember our classmates, who were killed in that Chinook crash right after we graduated.
Yeah. Charlie Moses and Wayne Lachlan.
Wayne Lachlan.
Tarkowski, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is, or even go back to some of the classmates who were killed when we were at West Point, or people, like Ben Sass, Senator Ben Sass, a guy who just diagnosed with very, aggressive pancreatic cancer to be dead. And, nobody gets guaranteed 80, 90 years here, right? So
Yeah.
it is that stoicism again. You're going to live for today and don't forget you're going to be gone tomorrow, and just be grateful. I think gratitude is the number one emotion that I kind of try to channel, because, I look back where I came from and where the things I've been through, my life, my family, and everything. I'm just so grateful to be able to be where I am today.
You are having a great run, and it continues on.
Yeah, not everybody gets people struggle. I've got a great family who's been healthy. There's not been a lot of my everybody knows this because without telling me, my wife just went through a year of breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Best wishes for her. Yeah.
Yeah, she's come out the other side of that now.
Good.
So when you go to the hospital and you're in cancer wards and you see the suffering that's out there in the world, and you just got to be grateful for every day, right? So
100%. 100%.
The friendships you have. Sounds kind of cheesy, but it's super true,
Very true. Dave, thanks so much for spending some time with us. You're a busy guy, and I really appreciate it. I know the classmates are going to really love catching up with you, man. It's been great. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe button. With over 900 living graduates, we have a lot of stories to tell, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.